episode of our commentary series, wherein we are going to delve into the second half of episode 3, the one-step process from season 1 of Dualistic Unity. So I've been digging the shit out of this series because it's so interesting to me to look back at all of the ground that we've covered and to recognize like all of this is kind of a dope and interesting conversation. But what was really being practiced underneath all of it is really the important part. The act of expression, the allowance of the allowance of who you are. Just being enough and just going through the process and getting out of the way and allowing that to be what it is. And so I really recognize how much of a difference there is in myself watching this, like in this conversation versus now. Because in this conversation, I was having a blast. But there was a lot of this conversation that was still, all right, let's walk through this a little bit at a time, right? Let's get into this in a way that's reasonable, that allows us to explore these things without making them the point, and saying that now I realize that I'm still kind of doing that, but there's less hesitation to it. There's less in terms of just don't say something that could lead them down a path that's going to go in the wrong direction. Because now I just recognize, like, have faith in yourself. Just keep talking. Like, by virtue of how I deal with myself, I'm going to deal with you. Right? Back then, I was still, to some degree, talking to myself and you, rather than neither of those things being a thing in themselves. So I can definitely tell the difference. I'm going to pass it over to Andrew now.
Oh, I'm absolutely with you. And even just in how much I would handcuff myself by thinking that there is a direction you got to stay on, or like just the constant sort of next thing, next thing, next thing, what to get, what to understand, even. And I was very new to, new to whatever the conversation was during that time. But like I saw Ray as someone who had been having it for a while. And so I had a bunch of questions and he had a bunch of not answers, but things he'd considered long enough that I didn't understand that they can almost be contorted into answers, I think. Not that there was anything that Ray did to do that. It was just like I was so used to just like trying to understand things deeper, get a deeper understanding of anything. Like that's anything I've gotten passionate about throughout my life, is to get a deeper understanding because it meant something about me. And so, early on this whole conversation, I started to think meant something about the deeper I understood the conversation meant something. But it's on the flip side, if it's a flip side of that, another side, a different side of that, it's fun too to see that even though I understand like the difference right now in the feeling of relaxation and like how many things I hadn't let go of at this point, like it's still the experience moment to moment. Like it's still, you're not so caught up in yourself in that moment. It's just like how much is around that, basing your almost like a checkpoint, but it's not even a checkpoint because it's like you're involved or you're not. And there's just things that have the potential to pull you out of that involvement more often. And there were a lot more of those in these videos than I feel now. But it's like nothing's changed when it comes to the moment to moment potential of getting caught in something or getting focused on something that's actually happening versus not. So I'll stop talking now. Because I'm
No, no, hell no. Because it's interesting because in recording these, I think what was fun about season 1 and even season 2, especially season 2, was that we would go into the conversation and we'd kind of get close to the point, and then we'd go into like, yeah, but what about the cool thoughts? What about some of these other things that we've been thinking? What about all these other things that are being brought up, and so on and so forth? And we're like, all right, let's go through that, and we do that. And then we'd all of a sudden come right back to this being the point, right? Because that's always the exercise. That's what we've been doing in our lives, getting caught on kind of a side quest and then coming right back to where we are. And so that's why these episodes are so fun. Like, for example, this episode. Uh, we are at the moment that this episode is about to continue on from the one step process episode. We are talking about the beginning of time. We are talking about the beginning of creation, and at the moment I'm about to get into like Genesis and shit. And so this is one of those conversations that again, it's fun because if you're looking for a deep conversation, these are almost to the point where you're just like, oh wow, that's a lot to take in. Like, and then you recognize like, right, but none of it was necessary. Like the conversation was fun, but it wasn't really the point. Right. And if it was the point, it wouldn't be as fun. And so we're about to have a fun little walk through whatever the fuck this is.
The void that you're talking about, the Big Bang.
All of which are terrible ways to put it. It's just all I've got.
Yeah. Like, I know I want to say like, where did it start? But
all possible. Okay, so this is what's interesting, right? Is in Genesis, it says in the beginning, right? Well, the original translation was in a beginning, which I find very interesting, right? All possible beginnings and endings exist from the current moment, right? Like that's the whole thing, is that if you had a story that was just reality became aware of itself and then reality ceased being aware of itself, that story exists, right? But then if you drew out that story and you made it longer and longer and longer, and you ended up, reality became so disconnected from the awareness of itself that it started creating other little parts of itself and interacting with them, and those little parts made a story, and they get more and more complex over time, and that complexity bred an entire reality that being was now existing within, separate from itself perceptually only. And so that huge story suddenly exists because it has to, within the potential of what could be. So our story on this planet is just one of those potentials. The entire story of this universe is just one of those potentials, which is why science is getting more to the multiple universe theory or the multiverse theory, right? Is that all different universes could possibly exist. Yeah, because all subjective experiences between the observer and the observed must exist, and the universe just facilitates all of those existing within what we deem to be time and space.
But why must they exist?
Because they're possible, right? All possibilities within the spectrum of duality exist within what is, right? We just experience the expression of those possibilities.
It's like, here we go. Yeah, now I'm gonna chew on that one for a good couple years at least, and then continue to do so forever. Because even just that back and forth right there, like, why must they exist? Because it's possible. It's like you can go back and forth and sit on your thumb forever. And that's kind of where I saw the point, was like digging in further and further to those things. And it's like, this is just one option. You got life to live. And so, yeah, it is fun to dig into those, but it's just one facet, one option, not even close to the whole thing.
We experience what those possibilities would be like, and we take it very seriously as though it's real, because it feels totally real, because of course it is absolutely real in its experience, but the perception we have of it as being real is slightly askew.
Yeah, I'm having a time. I was gonna say having a tough time wrapping my head or mind around that, but I feel
here's
like
a good example. Say The Lord of the Rings. Have you ever read The Lord of the Rings?
I've seen. I don't think I've seen all the movies, but I've seen maybe two.
The Lord of the Rings is an incredible work of writing, because the author not only wrote the story in stunning detail, but created languages, full articulable languages in that story. And that was one of the reasons it's so amazing. Well, everything within that story, maybe not all the details, because of course everything in our experience is open to interpretation, happened somewhere at some time on some planet in space and time somewhere, because all things that can happen will happen somewhere at some time. The universe is far too big for it to not happen. The other thing is that time is far too long for it to not happen, because we look at the universe as being 16.5 billion years old, right? And then what? The universe ends, and then what? It starts over again. How many Big Bangs have there been, right? And if they're always in the now, if every experience in every one of those incarnations of the universe is always happening now, then all of those incarnations exist in the here and now, which is why I say everything that can exist within the now does in some expression of time and space.
Okay. I think I'm getting closer.
It's difficult.
Still, even the idea of everything that can happen must happen in the eternal now, like
somewhere at some time. So what I mean is, like, there is an Andrew who at this moment is wearing a green sweater in the now instead of the sweater that you're wearing. Okay, that doesn't exist in this moment that we're experiencing, right? So the universe could come and go, Andrew could die, the planet could blow up, everything gets sucked back into nothingness, and it expands again. Maybe the next time around, another Andrew looks almost identical, has almost identical experiences, decides to wear a green shirt today. And in that moment of now, it exists. But we don't see it now. But it's still in the now. It's always in the now. And so that possibility has to eventually express itself in eternity. Eternity goes on forever. Everything that can exist within eternity will eventually. That's the whole point. That's why space is so big.
I want to bring this back for a quick second and just mention that this is also where you get the imagery of, if you had a room full of chimpanzees with typewriters, eventually they would create Shakespeare. Out of all the possibilities of everything that they could type, whether they knew what they were typing or not, eventually, in the span of eternity, one block of that would be a perfect copy of a Shakespearean play. Because out of all the possibilities in eternity that could exist, that is one of them. It's just astronomical in terms of the odds. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist over the span of eternity.
like, because we don't, yeah, even like trying to conceptualize anything like that. I had another thought and it went away, so I'm just gonna stop and we can keep playing. So it's almost like we're just experiencing
Everything.
I was gonna say an expression of it.
Yeah, one possibility, one
Because
expression.
it's like in the eternal now, but it's almost like not this now.
But it is, because it's always this now, right?
Yeah.
Think about it. So
Yeah.
the you that existed 5 minutes ago, if we were to rewind this video and go back 5 minutes, was in the now, right? And the you that is looking at me, slightly different than that person, is also looking at me in the now. And the only thing that separates the existence of those two nows, which are always in the present, always existing, is the process that you have viewed happening from one to the other. But they both exist in now.
Okay. All right. I think I'm getting. Well, this is trippy to watch after 2.5 years since then. Looking at, I was like, I thought about putting a fucking green shirt on this morning too. I didn't, but it did cross my mind, and I did look at the shirt right there, and I was like, no, I want to go. I want to go black. It's like, funny, but yeah, like this right now, seeing this, again, just the look in general, and how, because me, like, I remember thinking back to that episode, even in like season 2 or 3 to this episode, I think I came across it and I was like, holy shit, I'm relaxed in that one. I'm so relaxed in that one. And I remember thinking that, like, after the fact, like, that feels more relaxed than I feel right now. And that is no longer no longer the case. But it's like, to make sense again, it's like I have some memories. Most of my memories were from before that episode that'll hit me. And yet there was more shifts, I feel like, from me now to me then than any other point in my life besides being a, like, you know, child from 0 to 15.
And I think a large part of that is exactly what we've been talking about in this episode, which is refining whatever process you think you're going through, looking at whatever path you think you're on, and bringing it down to that one-step process over and over and over again. And all of a sudden, the rate of change seems to increase, but it's only because you're not holding it off by making it a longer trajectory than it needs to.
Yeah.
It's like it's looking at a movie strip, like a reel. All of those frames exist, but you can only see one of them at a time. They all exist. That's the point. The full movie from start to finish already exists, but you can only view one frame at a time. That's the entirety of creation. Everything that could be already is, but
I want to stop here because I know that this can be easily misinterpreted and it's overly simplistic. So everything I just said about the movie reel thing, I would like to add to it. If the movie of your life already exists, it's not just that one does, they all do. All of the possible movies of your life all exist, and some of them share similar frames. Some of them have, in fact, exactly identical frames. They may not have the same story that leads to that frame, but they have the same frame. And what we're doing is we're going through those frames and choosing which movie we're going to follow, which path we're going to take, because we come to a shared frame. And there might be 1,000 stories that go from that shared frame. And your choices allow you to pick all of them, but they all exist, is the point. But we all get, the wonderful choice of choosing any one we want because they all exist.
we get the view of one thing at a time from a perspective of separation. It's an amazing thing. It's an incredible gift if you think about it. God was able to fool itself into thinking it's not God.
So it's almost like, I imagine if we were able to take a step back or go into, if time is the fourth dimension, we were able to go into the fifth dimension almost and like see everything. And it's like we are three-dimensional things existing in a four-dimensional universe, or experiencing a four-dimensional universe, or perceptive of.
Which one's dominant? Are you the awareness? Are you what is first and human second, or are you a human first and what is second? And that's very much, we keep coming back to this, right? Because that's the religious thing. I don't want to be all that is, right? I want to be a human with a journey, right? I don't want to come to full responsibility of being the awareness of everything. I don't want to be, responsible for this. Essentially, that's all it is. I want to hold on to my fears and my concerns. I want to hold on to my petty jealousies, because the alternative is coming into alignment with this and looking at what I've created, which at the moment is kind of a fucking nightmare. Right? Like, the world that we've made is so disconnected from what we're talking about because we've been avoiding it for so long. We keep waiting for God to come save us, and the entire time we're sitting here having a drink waiting for it. It's like, yeah, all you have to do is go out and do something. And we know this collectively. There's more and more people who are like, we can change the world, we can fix the climate, we can fix the system, but we have to do it. And then you have another portion of society. It's like, no, there are people in charge to do that. And it's not me. It's not me. I'm not responsible. And that is the next evolution of our species. If we make it that far, it is to realize it's always us. It's always us. There's no passing the buck. If we're going to destroy the planet, that's on us. We can't blame others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like that goes hand in hand with the movie film scroll. Like, it's not a preset film. It's like each and every moment you got an option. And it's like, if you're holding on to this sense of who you are, it's like it's gonna narrow the frames, the available frames, or the seemingly available frames, but it also limits everything else. It limits the actions that you take, the things that you say and do and, look into and allow yourself to dig into. But if they're all on the table, then you can more or less get into anything. We just get caught up in thinking that all of those frames actually mean something about us instead of just a viewpoint, our perspective in that moment of the world. But also, like, so how far do you think you go? I mean, I was gonna say how far should you go, but there is not no should.
How far can you go?
In the
As far
sense of, I guess, if you want to dedicate every minute of every second of your day to, trying to do something, you can.
You see, I look at it this way. It's like we were saying earlier, right? We embody the universe when we get out of the way. And that's it, right? Like the more I get out of my way, the more I realize the impact I have on people I talk to has changed. And then I see them carry that ripple with them and affect other people. But it's never through me trying to convince them of anything. Right. So it's
Okay.
always just
Yeah.
allowing things to happen as they should. And if you look at society, like we were saying the other day about crutches, streetlights and stuff like that, we're holding back our own evolution by putting, child locks on everything. We're baby proofing everything. And as a result, we don't grow.
Okay. So it's because as we talked, I think I talked.
I just want to qualify quickly that in no way do I want people to not use child locks. That is not the point.
Yeah, keep on going with those, but man, like how much this was not something like, because you can even hear as I hear something, it's like not wanting to look at it, like not thinking it has anything to do with me ever, like not taking in the reality of the like personal experience side of things. It was all just like, the universe, reality. It's this finding out more, finding out more, finding out more. And it wasn't looking at, and I guess again, it's like I was to the degree that I could, at that, in where I was at. Yeah, fuck. All right. Yeah, it's like, what the fuck? There's nothing to judge there. It's all been a part of it.
And it was an absolute pleasure to fucking experience because I got to take that walk with you as you kind of ventured into this part of yourself, and that's exactly why this series is so enjoyable, in my opinion. To those that are watching it, I hope you're enjoying it. The point is that it's authentic. Like you're quite literally just jumping through your own shit and willingly doing so in a podcast format or whatever format this might be. And so it's great that that's all we've ever really done. The only thing that's changed over time is you.
Talked about it on episode 1 or 2, this idea of,
And
how can I be so happy if there's so much suffering, blah, blah, blah. But it's almost like it just has to come from within. And we are the universe embodied as, different things, sort of different, but, perceived as different.
Totally.
And if we're not going to do anything by going outside, like we are, but we aren't going to do anything by going outside of ourselves and trying to, almost like force that to happen, that change, as opposed to just being that change that ripples.
Yeah,
like be the change you want to see.
There's no control in it, right? Like that's the problem. It's like what people do when I'm suffering through a lot of overthinking. I'm going through a lot of anxiety or depression. I need to meditate. And it's like, okay, that will help. That will help. But meditation itself isn't going to solve the problem. It's just going to kind of delay the consequence. What the problem is it your mentality that you're attached to, right? So going through the motions is going to help a little bit, but it's not going to address the infection that's underneath that band-aid, right? And the same is true for like what we're doing in the world. Like we're trying to sequester more carbon in the ground by encouraging hemp to be grown pretty much worldwide, which is a great idea for climate change. Does nothing about the capitalistic system that's going to continue to lobby for pollution. It's going to continue to lobby for things that allow those corporations to cut corners and save money and continue to pollute. So as much as portions of society are like, yeah, we can fix this by doing this thing, we are not in fact addressing the mentality that's going to continue to cause the problem, right? It's like if we were to suddenly stop driving cars today, all oil-based cars, we just stop driving them. It's not going to take long for a corporation to come up with an alternative that's just as profitable and has the same environmental impacts in one way or another. I mean, lithium batteries are brutal, right, for the environment. So the problem is the mentality that we're operating out of for everything else, but we keep trying to address the things we're doing instead of why we're doing them.
So yeah, so I sort of asked before, but like with meditation, it's a lot of things that I watch, especially when I've been watching a ton of stuff about psychedelics, a lot of YouTube videos and reading stuff and whatnot. And a lot of people say like, oh, it pairs well with meditation, and the idea of meditation sort of being a way through everything. And I was questioning, like, it's just sitting like becoming aware, the idea of becoming aware that you are, thinking so much, or even just bringing awareness, which I think it's almost like, I think it can be a good first step in a process, but it's not this end all be all. Like, it's almost become this fad that's like, oh, meditate to improve your
Yeah.
life and all of this. And it's like, Alan Watts talks a lot about how it's if you're using it as a tool to become, it's just setting aside time to be present, which you could be all the time without it also.
Yep.
So it's not necessary. Like, nothing is necessary.
Nope, I don't meditate.
Yeah.
Like that,
I didn't think, I figured you didn't.
I don't meditate. And by I don't meditate,
I still don't. I just wanted to say that.
I mean,
And I also certainly don't. But I can tell again here, just like, even though I wasn't at this point, I don't think almost at all, I still had this sort of thought that, like, because I assumed it was about getting rid of thinking, like quieting the mind. Like, maybe that was a big part. It was like getting to a point where it was like silent. Yeah, that was definitely a big part. Fuck. Yeah. Like trying to get to a silent mind instead of just not thinking that they were personal. And then it's like, oh yeah, meditating, that can be actually quite the psychedelic experience when you're hearing this stuff and it's not personal, but it's not like to get you somewhere or achieve something. That's definitely what I thought.
Exactly. And as somebody said recently in one of our Patreon groups, they were just sitting outside, just enjoying what they were looking at, and they felt like they were meditating. It's like, yeah, because that's what that is. But do you see how it's funny how the word gets in the way? Like, we actually have an image of what meditation is instead of recognizing that it's synonymous with attention.
I don't go out of my way to sit down, close my eyes, and try. I just don't. Whereas to me, meditation is just non-attachment to the flow. Like, it's just watching it without any judgment, without any analysis. It's just watching it without opinion. And as soon as you're in that state and it's just flowing by, you can be doing anything. I used to love shoveling ditches. But at one point when I was younger, I had a job shoveling ditches, and I found that to be one of the most meditative things I'd ever done in my life, because it was just going through the motions, watching it go by, right? But not all meditation is meditation. I mean, and that's unfortunately true. I've met a lot of of clients in the past who said, oh, I have this great meditation that I do, and I am immediately uncomfortable. It's like, what do you mean? And it's like, well, it's this process. I go through this guided meditation, and it teaches me to envision it this way. And I'm just like, Jesus, no wonder you're still suffering, because all you're doing is creating more stuff. You're still in the driver's seat. You're still in control. Now you're visualizing a certain feeling. Now you're cherry picking instead of just experiencing where you are and what is happening. You're superimposing your preferences again. And that's not meditation. But we convince ourselves it is because it feels good in the short term. It feels very calming to imagine yourself as a lotus blossom emerging into the sun, until you leave your house and you go into the street and somebody's like, get the fuck out of the way. Where's your lotus blossom there, right? Like, you need to be able to hear that guy and go, right, still disconnected. Doesn't mean anything about me. He's probably just having a bad day. Yeah. Boom, moment of meditation, and had nothing to do with envisioning the sun or a growing tree or anything. It was just non-attachment.
Mm-hmm. I find it kind of funny when someone's I don't know if I saw it in a movie or like real life or something, but someone's sitting and meditating semi in public but in a quieter place, and then someone is like noisy nearby and they're like, shut up, you're ruining my meditation. It's like, yo, what? That's like, yeah,
Exactly
I
the
think you're
point.
missing something there.
I had a
It's
friend once who, and this is where it really became obvious to me. I don't know, I was about 26, 27, and he would take himself so seriously that he would have a meditation time in the day. And if you try it, like, I was walking by his house one day, I went, oh, I'm just going to stop in and say, hey. His girlfriend comes to the door. Can't disturb him. He's in his meditation time. Like, for what? Like, obviously, so nothing disturbs him, so this shouldn't bother him at all. Right? Like, that's the point. But and he was very upset about it, but it's because, like, oh, I need this time. It's like, come on, like, it doesn't have to be another facet of your ego. It doesn't have to be another arduous journey. This is not a practice of I'm climbing Everest.
But we'll turn anything into that. Anything into that. Like how long, like we have apps that track how long you meditate for, man. It's like you plug in your, oh, I didn't get my 60 minutes today. I only got 42. Oh no, I can't take on the day. Oh, my day's ruined. It's just another thing to ruin your day and not take responsibility for how you're feeling. Huh. Huh. Unreal. Unreal.
It's a practice of realizing you are Everest. Like, there's nothing to climb.
And I think it just reinforces, because these are things I'm loving these discussions, because we're breaking through my own habitual patterns. I'm very much someone who has always had, routines and
Props to past Andrew.
ideas of, having a very structured to-do list for my day, and, going through doing manifestations, doing a meditation, and being consistent about it. And the idea that it almost breeds this idea that or this illusion, like with your friend, that there's somewhere to get, and they're doing this thing so that they have to do it for, I meditated for a year and now I'm here and I'm a changed person, and I've realized that now is all there ever is. It's like, well, it always was, and you going through, you didn't need that. And that's what I'm literally, as we speak, realizing, is because there have been times, especially when I was very attached to like meditating, I was like, oh, I have to meditate, and then I'll be busy one morning and then I'll miss it and I'll like feel bad about it. I'll be like, oh, I didn't meditate. Like, oh, am I going to be able to handle everything that comes at me today? Like, I don't know. I find sometimes that when I don't meditate, then I can't, take on the day, and I'll react certain ways because, oh shoot, why did I react that way? Oh, right, I didn't meditate this morning.
Right.
It's like, now I'm realizing I don't need that. It's like something you need until you realize that you don't. It's kind of same with suffering. It's like suffering is necessary until you realize that it isn't. And I think it's just
the same.
yeah.
It is. I mean, that's the only thing, is that
Yeah. And the meditation, like, I really did get caught, not caught even, because it was always like getting closer and closer to letting go, to like being willing to be uncertain, and it's just been this sort of condensing into it. And like even just right now, like I had this thought that was like it was the condensing closer and closer, and it totally went away. And I was like, ah, shit, hold on. And I just hit pause, and I totally have no idea. Oh yeah, and it's like, all right, just start talking. How about that? And so and then I got to it's like, yeah, the whole time's just been, you know, a meditation say gives me more control over my day. And then it was like, you know, writing notes down gives me some control over having the ability to say what's next, just in case, you know, I miss something. And now I'm at a point where it's like I'm there isn't so much going on, but it's like involvement word to word without trying to hold on to like, you know, something to say or respond to. And like I'm actually seeing things, but it's all been this sort of, you know, condensing, focusing, I guess, like things adjusting, blurry or to a lot clearer. And it's just been like coming closer to being myself. Cause like again, you can't prepare to do that. It's like it's just what's happening. It's what's going on. Like it doesn't mean you can't, but like how much are you diluting yourself by preparing and trying to have control over what's next?
Exactly. It's like, I'm meditating to establish a sense of control, but the sense of control that I'm trying to establish is the source of the pain that's driven me to meditate.
I still use my identity. I have no problems using my identity. Hi, I'm Ray. No problem at all. Um, I don't take any of it seriously. I know it's just a tool. It's a way of communicating. It's a very convenient way of trying to communicate, you know, concepts and languages and jokes and all of the fun stuff that goes with duality. Because again, if there was no perception of division, there would be no humor, right? Because humor is almost always at someone else's expense, right? So all of the experience that we have within division and duality is a beautiful thing until you get caught up in it, until you start thinking, oh no, my interpretation is what is. And it's like, it's not. It's just what you're seeing right now, right? It's just the facet that you're becoming aware of as you turn that crystal around and you look at all the different angles, right? Like that's all interpretation is. That's all perception is. But we tend to think what I think is real, right? And somebody asked me recently, it's like they're trying to get this. They're really trying to understand, like, how are we all the same thing? I don't understand how we're all the same awareness. And it's like, right, because you think you are what you think you are. And that sounds simplistic because it is, unfortunately, as simplistic as it gets. So long as you think your thoughts can reflect truth, you cannot see unity. You just can't experience it, right? Because you're in the way. Whatever you're doing, you're thinking about unity, you're thinking about a concept, you're thinking about, you know, which is always dualistic. If you're thinking about unity, then you're thinking about separation by contrast. You're thinking, right? The only way to experience unity is to be unity, which is not a state of thought. It's not a state of anything. It's just what is. It's just getting out of the way and going, oh, right, I'm not separate from any of this. You know, I'm not, there is no division outside of the one that I'm convinced or rather committed to perceiving.
Definitely. It brings me back to the idea that there is, I feel like as humans, we get caught up in this idea of adding to ourselves and becoming something and being in on this journey and this process. And I think above all is the only journey should be, you know, realizing that there isn't one, but also that there is nothing that like the all of these ideas of that you think you're adding to yourself. It's more so just peel them back is, I want to say better, but will bring you
Clearer.
close, clearer.
I will
Yeah.
say clearer. That I will
Yeah.
say. It's not better. This is the one thing I always worry about when in terms of spiritual conversations is that we start talking about levels. levels of
Mhm.
awareness, levels of consciousness, levels of spirituality. And I said this in one of my one of my earliest TikTok videos. It's like, there are no levels. There are only directions towards yourself and away from yourself. That's it. There are no levels. Like, everybody is always what is, and they always have the capacity to realize it in a moment, just like that. Sometimes it's a near death experience, sometimes it's psychedelic, sometimes it's just losing everything, but it's always there, always. It's just a matter of letting go of our fight, and that's why faith is such an interesting concept to me. Like I said, I was raised Roman Catholic, as were you, and we were drilled with this idea of faith over and over and over again, faith and humility, right? And never never made any sense. Like, I got it as a Christian. I'm like, yeah, okay, faith, everything's gonna be fine. God's got my back. But then I immediately had preconceptions of what that meant. I immediately thought to myself, well, this is what that means to be fine, and I'm going to pray for that. And so praying is, for a certain end result, is still control. Faith in an end result is still control, right? So it's not actually faith. So you're not actually being present. And of course, how could you be if you're having faith in an external being that doesn't exist? So now you've left yourself again, you're back in identity, right? And so you've immediately just lowered your sense of awareness. And what's odd is that all that happens when we raise our sense of awareness is that we're just becoming more aware of what is always the case, that we're not separate, right? So you immediately know you're losing awareness if you're starting to think about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of these things come back to, any struggles. It's like, we were talking about. I love how quick I'm just like, yeah, it checks out. Yep, yep. That's it. Like, after you just like unload it, but and I'm guessing there was a side of appreciation where, like, even though it's like I'm not fully maybe recognizing what all that means deep down, it's not like I'm like, I don't like that. Every time it was like, yeah, all right, I'll take the rest of my life to chew on that one. And it's just kept being that, even if it wasn't all hitting. Because I've spent, I've said it a bunch of times. Like, I look back at old videos and I'm like, will judge myself for where I'm at that point. And it's just my own judgment that I'm having right now. But like, I'm going in a direction, it's maybe feel like I'm far from that. And I feel like, go back and forth with whatever. Again, how far? No, it's like, at least I was sharing that and not like, fuck bitches get money by sports cars sort of thing. It's like, as much as, things, perceptions kind of get in the way, it's always there and potential. It's not like it was one thing and now I've changed. It's like always on this spectrum. And it's like, I'm not going anywhere now. I wasn't going anywhere then, but I was curious as fuck, enthusiastic about it.
And I had no need to convince you of anything. Like, that's the point. This is where it's like, you have questions here, let's just keep talking about it, and you're going to go through all the motions that you need to, and that I'm going to give you what I got right now, and you're going to take from it what you can, and if the conversation keeps going, not just with me, but with reality as a whole, because it was your inquisitiveness here, it was your ability or your willingness to question that was really determining the changes that you were going through. It wasn't me. Like, you could have had the same revelations through a conversation with 1,000 people, 10 of which might have been impactful and the rest of which might have, just been reinforcing. But the point is that it was your willingness to get something out of it that mattered. And what had changed in me was that because I no longer had any need to get anywhere, I had no need to get you anywhere. Right. So there was no frustration. There was nothing but just you having the space to change at whatever pace you wanted to change. And holy fuck, did that ever inform how I treat the retreats now? That's exactly what the retreats are. I have no need of anyone to get anywhere at these retreats. You're exactly who you are right now. And the more you accept that, the more you, oddly enough, you change.
Thoughts, but also just the idea of who you are, which is, I guess, a thought too, but it's the identification and the realization like, oh, I want to think everything's unity, like I am that person too. And it's like you're still holding on to this idea that you are this person, or you're this spirit experiencing a person or something separate. And it's just what is.
That's right.
It's
And
always has
the
been.
danger there is that you end up projecting your view of yourself into that person, right? Like, so you start expecting how you view your intentions to be reflected through their actions. And that's when you end up with expectations and frustrations. Like, well, I would never act that way. It's like you would in that situation, in that person's life, but you're so caught up in thinking of yourself through the lens of your current life that you can't see that, right? So it's again negation. It's getting past the idea that you would do anything in particular, that you would act in any way in particular that allows you to see yourself in that person's eyes, not as a conceptual thing, but an actual moment of recognition where you can feel where they're coming from, what their intentions are and where they're going. But it's never conceptual. That's why I find life coaching and psychology to be so funny, and yet so totally wrong in its direction, because they will almost teach you a structure to help people with. And it's like, oh, if this is happening, go back to this is probably coming from this and this and this. But they don't teach you to feel that in the moment. They don't teach you how to be present with that person, to get your mind out of the way and to allow that spontaneous intelligence that we were talking about embodying to actually act, right? Because in a coaching session, as with in a friendship or a relationship or a marriage or anything, your relationship in that moment is going to be more or less beneficial based on how present you both are. So if we're not teaching that to psychologists, if we're not teaching that to therapists, how to be present, then all we're doing is arming them with another intellectual idea of themselves. And they're going into these sessions where they could be helping to promote unity, and they're creating division only as a result of the mentality that they're holding on to. So it's so sad that we haven't gotten this point yet. Like this, and conversations that have been happening like this for a long time, are going to continue to change that. In the same way that Carl Jung affected Alcoholics Anonymous, right? The founder of Alcoholics Anonymous went and talked to Carl Jung when he was developing that system. And it was Carl Jung's entire insight about the collective consciousness, that we aren't divided, that allowed them to realize one of the last steps in the 12-step process is the acknowledgement of a higher power, that you are part of something greater, right? And so these insights are changing our society. But it's like you were saying earlier, it's like we almost start to focus on the actions that we're taking instead of the mentality that those actions came from, right? It's like, I'm going through the 12-step process, and it's like, right, but if you could find the mentality of the person who created that 12-step process in yourself, then the 12-step process is irrelevant. You see the whole picture. Now it's just going through the stage, or going through the process, right? So it's always just awareness. It's a one-step process, awareness. It's so hard to explain, but that's what it is.
Yeah, it's almost like with those processes, and if you're not coming from this place of unity, you're just giving out a bunch of fish as opposed to teaching people how to fish. That old
Got it.
saying. It's like you gave them 10 or 20 fish, and something starts coming up and they're like, oh shit, which fish is it? It's that one that I'm supposed to eat in this situation. It's like they don't realize they can just learn how to fish, and then they never have to remember which fish to have. They don't have to hold on to any fish. They can just catch a new one each and every time. And that's
exactly it. And that's ultimately the epitome.
Yeah, and just being yourself is that. Like, it's not even teaching someone how to fish, it's just showing someone that's an option. It's like fishing is also an option. You can just come hang out, and how I fish isn't going to be how you fish, but we'll be able to catch some fish and actually enjoy that experience, and then enjoy the experience of eating the fish. Because someone just chucking you a frozen fish every day, having them go buy one, it's like, to do what? Why do you got to feel like you just got to take from everything instead of expressing into everything? Actually being involved, going fish.
epitome of martial artists mentality as well, right? Is that it's like Bruce Lee said, no form as form. It's you are in the moment, and as much as all the structures and all the movements you've learned in the past might influence what you're going to do, as soon as you make an assumption about what's going to happen, you're no longer in that moment. You've cut your ability to adapt to it in half at least. And so it's always going into the situation realizing I don't have control, I have influence if I'm present. And that was one thing my Sifu, he really drilled that home into me. It was like, the more you're thinking about the outcome, the more likely it is you're going to lose this fight, because you're not in it.
Yeah, it's like with almost anything like that, the test analogy, having half of your focus on the outcome of the test, how you're going to do, and half of it on the test itself. That's or the archery or anything. It always just comes back to being there, being in it, always, not focused on any other potential outcome, what might be.
It's like we're superimposing a narrative over our experience. Like we're experiencing what is, and then we're like, no, that's not what I want to see. I want to see this. And so we superimpose a story over what we're doing, and then it changes the experience as a result, right? Like I've had jobs where if I just went to work and I did my job, I would have learned something about myself that day. Instead, I went to work and bitched about my job. And so all I learned about was complaining about my job. All I learned about was the experience that I was superimposing on what was. So now instead of just learning from the experience, I had to learn that I was superimposing an experience, and to get out of the way to get back to the lesson that I could have been learning to begin with, right? So it's always just adding distortion, right? We just put a story in there and that changes it.
Like clinging to any belief precludes you from understanding its opposite, or believing in anything, cuts you off from anything that may come from being open to that idea or belief or concept or structure not being the truth. And it's like it never is. No matter what, there is no belief that is ultimate truth, because ultimate truth is not a belief. So it couldn't be. It just is. It just is, always, forever.
It's not a concept. It's not a concept. That's the thing. I repeat this in my comment section constantly, because it's the crux. Concepts aren't truth. Concepts are not reality. They can point to reality. They can indicate reality. They can try and describe reality, but the description is never the described. And until we get that, we get really focused on the description. We get really focused on the described, because it's easier, right? Like it's easier to talk about a building than to understand how it's built.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that, and I can tell, knowing myself, I was fucking pumped that we got to this point in the conversation by the third episode. Like you can see it on my face in this conversation. I'm like, holy fuck, we just got here. Holy shit, this guy is continuing to talk about this stuff. Like, because like this is usually, well, long before this, but people would just leave the conversation before ever getting to the really interesting stuff, where you can see it even on your face. You're like, okay, hold on. Right? Like it's not just conceptual at this point. You've actually seen something. Right? And it's actually indicating something else. And so you're just following that pattern, that process from here. I love this episode.
Oh, for sure. And because I'll think about myself as being it's like, oh, it's all about the words, all about the words. But like in this episode, you straight up say like it has nothing to do with the word building, looking at the building, talking about the building. It's getting involved in building the building, getting involved in doing stuff. And I remember like hearing you say things like that, and that getting me excited, because like for a while, even before Dualistic Unity started, it was like, all the spiritual shit, the Eckhart Tolle, all that stuff, like that's very wordy. It's like, yeah, you're present, you're involved in things. And part of me is like, sometimes and again, this is just arbitrarily fucking looking back at stuff, feel like before I started to think of myself as like this spiritual TikTok person, like there wasn't a focus on that. And it felt like I was more taking, like that got in the way of me taking the reality of it in, like the reality of being here, being involved, getting into, involved in reality, I feel like I almost did it more, before that narrative started picking up. But yeah, it's funny to think that people run. I mean, not funny really, but like throughout your life, you had people run from things that we got through in the first 3 episodes. Like I could imagine that being exciting for sure. For sure. And I had a question you brought up with like AA stuff and the 12th step. I'm not familiar with the process. I've heard some things, even just videos I make, people are like, oh, sounds like some of the steps from AA. And it makes sense that Carl Jung, that I get that now, how that's correlated. But the idea at the end with the higher power, I've always like been curious about that. And I've sort of seen it with the idea that we are that higher power always, and it's almost like we just have so many fucking layers that we have forgotten or don't realize it or think that we're not or think that it's something else, but
Or we don't want to think that it's us.
yeah, or like I feel like with that being 12 step, so it's almost like I feel like a lot of people could believe in a separate other power, and that seems a little bit concerning.
It can be. I think it's important to remember that the 12-step process, or AA, or any anonymous group, for example, they're designed to take people out of a really, really like low energy state. They're designed to try and pull people out of a certain hell. It's 12 steps to being free of the attachment to the addiction, but it's not necessarily 12 steps to being free. And so you can look to a higher power, and that might help you see yourself as a part of everything else. You can see more of a purpose in your life, or you can see more meaning in what you do. But it's just as dangerous to get stuck on that, to get stuck on the idea that there is that higher power. So the next stage beyond that is to recognizing that any division you perceive between yourself and that higher power is still that existent identity, that's still that existent idea of yourself, which ultimately was the reason you fell into alcoholism, which ultimately was the reason that you fell into despair. So it's always just the process of slowly shedding that, right? Whereas the 12-step process, they don't take you all the way to the end, where it's like, now you're everything, right? They take you to the end where it's like, now you don't have to worry about going out in public and drinking yourself to death, because you have a sense of meaning and purpose. Okay, now go on and carry on your own, right? So it's not meant to be the full-on thing. It's kind of like
I was just thinking that we should found a higher power anonymous.
Deepak Chopra.
I was going to say, is that not Patreon? Is that not our groups already?
Touche.
Wrote this book, How to Know God, and it's a good book. I definitely recommend reading it. It's got some really interesting some stories in there, and some anecdotal evidence and some historical context about the various levels of awareness from going to being separate to recognizing that you and God are one. And it does a great job all the way through to the end. And then he stops before the inevitable recognition that there is no division at all, because we don't want to have that conversation. We really don't. You'll notice, like, spirituality will get to a certain level of depth, and then it will almost stop for the sake of continuing to perpetuate its own practice. Because as you said, after a certain point of awareness, all practices become pointless, or rather they are no longer the point, right? They're just practices. So if you can practice meditating, you could practice kung fu, you can practice darts. Either one is going to bring you to a more refined state of awareness if you're able to use it that way, if you're able to be in that state of awareness when you're doing it, instead of using it to get you there. It's the cart before the horse.
Yeah, it's literally anything. Like, you can create a podcast and be fully there, and that's it. You can, walk around for 15 days straight, and that's it. You can, try to start drinking more water, and if you're there when you're drinking the water, like, that's it. It's like it's literally doing anything whatsoever. It doesn't, you don't need anything, because what is, and that's it. And that's like the end of it. So I'm like, with Deepak Chopra, like with his book, did he do that in a way for people to realize it on their own, or because he wanted to,
That's a
you know,
great question.
make sure that people, you know, didn't get there, so they kept needing
Or is it just something
things?
he doesn't want to see? Is that as far as he was able to go based on what he was
So
prepared to accept? Right. And it's like in the Matrix, the Oracle says we can never see past decisions that we're not prepared to make.
mhm,
Right. And that's kind of
yeah.
it. It's like it makes you wonder why, like, how so many of these spiritual teachings, or so many of these teachers or these avatars stopped at certain points, right? And it's because that was as far as they were comfortable. Because I'll say, and you know, I'm not putting myself on a pedestal by any means, but I'm old and I've been at this for 20 years, and it feels like an eternity. And every time, or rather regularly, there are moments where I am once again faced with the realization that I'm still holding on to an idea of myself. And so I have to let it go. I have to, and I don't have to. I choose to. I choose to because to me, it's what drives me, and it's not because I want to get anywhere, but because I can. It's fun. Why not? And I enjoy seeing the ripples around me. But I mean, at the end of the day, not everybody's going to continue to do that. And in my life, I've seen many people just kind of fall away because it was the idea, I don't want to go that far. I don't want to see that. I don't want to let that go. I want to continue thinking that, you know, a partner is going to give me value, or I want to continue thinking that focusing on the future is going to get rid of my anxiety. I'm just not prepared. You know, I actually had somebody on TikTok. It was great. I was this young guy 6 months ago, and I made a video, and
Just want to say you're dropping a fuckload of gems, man, left and right. Second time around, hitting just as hard, and just like having an appreciation now for like more of the gravity of everything that you're saying. Whereas at this point, just like, just I'm feeling a lot better than I had previously in my life. And it wasn't, again, it was like, as long as it was the conversation, it wasn't about me. And it wasn't like, despite, you know, relaxing more and more as I went, it's like that was a component, but it wasn't, you know, it was like the next step was like, oh, this means that it's on me.
which you couldn't have accepted if you didn't relax enough to do so. So this was just the process of you coming to accept that it was on you. That's it. That's all this was you easing into it by making it about the discussion just enough, kind of tongue in cheek, right? To keep going.
and he responded. He was quite angry about it, and it was because, you know, I was talking about being one and blah blah blah. And so we ended up in this conversation and went back and forth for like half a day. And by the end of it, he went, "So what you're saying is that my idea of myself is just an idea, that the reality behind it is that I'm an extension of everything." And he stopped and he looked at his screen and he went, "I don't think I'm ready to see that yet." And it was about as honest an answer as I could ever hope. But the seed was there. It was planted. The conversation happened, and it wouldn't have had I got defensive. If I was trying to defend a certain idea or a concept or an idea of myself, I would have been offended when he's like, "Well, yeah, I think you're full of shit." It's like, yeah, I might be, probably. Let's work through it, right? Because we can. And so, at least if we can get to a point where we have that conversation where people can clearly say, "Yeah, I'm not quite ready for that yet." That's a lot better than going, "No, there's nothing there." Right? That changes things significantly. And again, as with everything, because we're going to have to wrap this up soon, it's a one-step process. It's always just the one-step process of allowing yourself to be aware. And the more you do that, the more it changes everything.
Yeah, so much. It's been pretty awesome. Like, I love this, and the the idea of it being scary is, I don't know. It's not at all. It's like more exciting than anything I've ever experienced in.
And right here, I remember very, very much thinking, oh, wait. And at the same time, maybe it won't be that rough, because who am I to know?
And I hear the same even to this moment right now. It's like, oh, wait. And again, maybe it won't. In my life. And yeah, it's like I find myself even, last couple of weeks, like I always, and a lot of times I will, listen to an audiobook, listen to music walking around, but I find myself more and more not listening to, not even having headphones in, walking around New York, and I just listen to everything, and I'm just aware of what is, and I'm like, wow, this is all me.
That's it.
Pretty cool. It's a pretty
And
cool place.
existence becomes fulfilling, as it
Mhm.
always was if we allowed it to be, right? Like, I don't, people have asked, like, have you read this spiritual book that just came out? I said, I don't read spiritual books. I don't listen to any of that stuff anymore unless it pops up, like if it's on my For You page, or if it's on YouTube or something. Oh, an Alan Watts clip. It's like, sweet. But I don't need it. I don't look for it. It's just there if I run across it, right? Because I'm the point, you're the point, right? This moment here now is the entirety of existence, if we can allow ourselves to get out of the way and witness it for what it is. But as long as we're convinced that I am what I think I am, right, then I'm not following that one step process of, questioning that until I become aware of what I actually am, which is not a concept.
Mhm. Yeah, and clean, like all of those things, spiritual books, speeches, anything like that. It's almost like if they got it and they're expressing it, they're all saying the same exact thing, just doing their best to leave seeds for people who have ears to hear. And so you're just listening to the same thing over and over. And I've heard some Alan Watts clips that I've heard many times before in speeches, and it makes so much sense now than before, because I had all these ideas of what things were and who I was. I was like, I mean, it sounds good, like it kind of makes me feel good, but it's like, what's he really saying? It's like, oh, he's just saying the same thing over and over in different ways, figuring out different ways to say it, and it's all the same. And him and everyone else who has ever understood that and attempted to express it in language, in words, which is not an easy thing to do.
Obviously, look at us, right? We're doing the exact same thing. But it's interesting to me that
And with the Alan Watts thing, I can feel myself right there, sort of wanting to almost like emulate that, because I was saying, oh, he was figuring out all these different ways of saying it, just saying it in different ways. And like that was a big component of my, quest to get to the perfect way of expressing it. And it was all these different ways, which again, like even if there was this sort of carrot there, it's not to say that it wasn't still seeds the whole time, just a little bit driven by getting somewhere, which almost was like maybe entirely necessary to get it all out there. I mean, of course it was entirely necessary. It's what the fuck happened. Like, who am I to have all these fucking measurements about, oh, what was driving me? It was like, yeah, I was what I was. At least I was fucking expressing something, it was expressing myself to the degree that I could, and am still doing no differently than right now.
Just going through all the different variations of words until you recognize where the words are coming from, and then making that the point. Wanted to mention that I think Alan would have enjoyed the Dualistic Unity podcast. I'm pretty sure that he would have been happy to be a guest, and that we would have had a good fucking laugh.
because all there is you, then it's always been you trying to express this to yourself. Always. And we always are. If we open our ears and listen, the lessons are everywhere. Like, we learn it in everything. You can stare at a tree growing and learn all you need to know about your own nature if you have the ears to hear, if you have your eyes wide open. right? And that's it, is that you don't need a guru, you don't need a structure. They're all nice and they can teach you things, sure, but there's always the danger of becoming attached, right? And so just keep focusing on that one-step process, right? I'm so excited, man. I love these conversations, and I love the pace with which you are growing. It's so interesting and fun for me, because as you said, you're going through your own process while we have this conversation, but of course so am I, right? Like, I'm walking away from these podcasts refining the things that I go through. I'm walking away from these going, right, yeah, I'm still crazy, but I'm not the only one, that kind of thing, right? Like, it's encouraging, because the conversation is really all we need to do. We just need to keep having this conversation. And the more people that do, with the intention of just having the conversation, of just, practicing that one-step process again, right? The more we're going to continue to gain awareness, not just individually, but collectively, which is also individually.
Mhm.
You know
Yeah.
how it goes. Yeah. So we're going to wrap up episode 3, because it's been almost an hour and a half now. And as everybody who listens to this knows, we tend to keep talking. We do have a upcoming social anxiety workshop on October 19th. You can find the details on social media, or of course on our website. And as well, you can find some more exclusive content and video content on our Patreon page for only $5 a month. And I will be away going camping as of tomorrow. I will be gone until next weekend, so you may not see much activity from me online, but definitely contact Andrew if you have any questions, or if you want to just challenge where he is right now, because that's probably the best thing for him.
Definitely. Yeah. And feel free, I think YouTube comments are probably the best way to reach either of us directly. I tend to respond to pretty much any and every YouTube comment I get. It's a lot more difficult to do that on other platforms, but if you do have questions about this, things you want us to expand on, please comment them down below.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. We will see you next week for episode 4.
Whoo, man, it's fun going back to these and being it like, talking about the reality that like we're looking at perspectives, like, and everything that's happened since then, like the 2.5 years has been the process of me looking at that version of myself and being able to look and notice differences and changes, and like actually like gravitational differences. Like if I had looked at myself, from age 20 to 22, I don't know if I would have noticed many changes if I had been. But again, it's like I wasn't in this process of like recording and expressing and sharing so many things like constantly all the time. It's like words go round and round with those, but like you're always just expressing yourself. You're always just sharing where you're at, how relaxed or how tense or how, you know, much you're trying to be in control or letting it go. So it's cool to be able to, I guess, even just to notice such drastic shifts in both of us too. Like I notice, and my perspective, just my perspective of you, how that's shifted over time, which is like a similar but different sort of thing. But yeah, it's cool to be able to do this.
It's funny because I've communicated a number of times that I was okay if it was just me who got this. Like, I was okay with it, and it didn't matter which direction the world was going in. Like, there was still a part of me that's just like, this could all just go up in smoke, and it could, straight up. Yeah, but I was okay just knowing that life would continue, and I would continue, and everything would continue, and so on and so forth. And then all of a sudden I'm chatting with you, and you're just continuing on with it, and you're taking it in, you're processing it, and you have this earnest enthusiasm for it. And over the process of these conversations, I really started feeling like hope, man. Like I really started looking around and going, holy fuck, because again, like, not only were you willing to have the conversation for your own reasons, but every step of the way it got more uncomfortable for you, and you just kept going. despite being somebody who was raised in comfort, somebody that at one point I would have told myself has no reason to change. And so these conversations changed my life in a lot of ways, man.
Likewise, dude. And it's kind of trip we've talked about feeling like being in, in a story, in a book, in the Bible, something. But just the fact that that was a perspective that you had for that someone coming from comfort, like couldn't. It's like yeah, there's all different a myriad of different, sorts of reasons possibly one way or the other, but it's the same. It's the same. The narrative. It's not freedom. It's not freedom. The assumptions, story, none of it. None of it. So, yeah, it's trippy as shit. Dualistic Unity, the whole thing of it. It's like, what the fuck? And like being the thing I never knew that I wanted. Like, because I never really wanted much. I never had to want for much. I never had to, like, there was never anything that wasn't there. It's not that I didn't, strive for things and, accomplish things, whatever, all that stuff. But there was a drive there that was as much running towards as it was running away, and for a reason. And it wasn't freedom, it wasn't relaxation. It was still tension, whether it was from, you know, getting yeah, there was nothing physical about the reasons that I was tense. I'll put it at that. Take that as you will. But it was still tension. It was still tension, and it was still reinforced by a overarching perspective of myself and how I was doing. And even if I felt like I was doing well, it still wasn't freedom. It was still maintenance. It was still fuckloads of fear of losing of losing the perspective. So yeah, it doesn't matter where you're coming from, even. It's like it's the same underlying root. Same root. And it ain't freedom. So yeah.
Exactly. And we really are all in this together. This has been a dope episode. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the live stream in the comment section and whatnot. We will be coming back to another commentary episode in the near future, I have no doubt. But for now, have a fantastic day, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.